Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, January 21st, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's happening?
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
How's it going? I'm trying a new thing.
I think you did that last week, right?
I said something. I'm going to try a new one every episode to see which one sticks.
I think
that's gonna run out quickly.
Nope. It's going to be funny every time.
I want to hear Chris say howdy next. In that
howdy doody.
Thick New England accent of his, or whatever, East Coast accent of yours, saying howdy.
What is the accent? It's not New England.
I am from Philadelphia. I guess it's the Philly accent.
Philly accent. Before we get started, we should say that this is an exciting week for Slash Film. We have three of our writers are getting ready to head out to Park City, Utah for Sundance. And that includes Chris, Brad, and Ben. Are you guys ready?
No. I have never felt more unready for something in my life, so that'll be fun.
I mean, I'm in Utah already, so I'm kind of ready.
You got 1 foot in already, Brad.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be doing an episode later this week before you guys actually get on the plane, or before Chris and Ben get on the plane, previewing the films of this year's Sundance, and hopefully we'll get you guys on from Park City to tell us what you think of, the movies, and we'll be, after the festival, be doing, our typical, best of the fest episode as well. So you'll get all that info on, the films that you should have on your radar that you probably don't know about in this coming week. But before then, let's talk about what we've been doing this week prior. Let's start out with what we've been doing. It's been rainy here in Los Angeles, so I haven't been doing a lot. It's been last week it was pouring almost every single day, which in LA means that people don't forget how to drive, and it's an hour to get anywhere. This weekend, I took an improv comedy class, which, to the surprise of Brad, he was surprised to hear I was doing that. I'm not interested in being an actor or a comedian, or I don't really want to get into improv. My curiosity for taking this class was purely in the fact that I'm, trying to up my game as a magician. And a lot of magicians script their magic in a way that if the audience interacts in any way that is not planned, it kind of throws you off your script and it makes you look like an idiot. And I feel like the best magicians are the ones that are actually able to, interact and make it a conversation rather than a performance. And also in the best ways possible, like Brad does. I know, Brad, you have some improv comedy background. Are able to take something that happens and, come back to it in a funny way later on. So I was thinking that taking an improv comedy class would give me some techniques in how to better do this. I was wrong. I was definitely wrong.
It was a failure?
Yeah, no, it wasn't a failure. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun, and I was doing it with a couple other magician friends of mine, so it was great to be doing it with people I knew, and not making an ass out of myself in front of strangers. And the games were a lot of fun. I was just hoping that, I think what I was hoping for was that there would be more techniques that would, trying to think of a way to say this. I don't want to say shortcuts, but the whole yes and. I thought there would be more oh, here's some tips to how to get things in a groove more. Here's how you can think about callbacks better, and here's how whatever. And it's really just listen better. Yeah, I know that, but there were some things I think I did learn. I did learn a lot about posture and how that can completely change a performance. This sounds obvious, but I don't know. I learned a bunch of stuff. There was actually this interesting game that I think it was called Last Letter, First Letter. Have you ever done this, Brad?
I mean, I don't think so, but describe it. Maybe I have, just under a different name.
You would just have a conversation with someone else in the group, and they would have to start their sentence with a word starting with the last letter of the word you used in your sentence.
Oh, okay.
So what that would do would cause you not to be able to plan whatsoever for the next line. You would have to be completely in the moment because, Brad, if I asked you what you had for breakfast, you would have to answer with something starting with T. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that would be totally change your... I don't know. Anyways, I'm going too long on this. It was a lot of fun. I might take another class just for the fun of it. But...
I mean, if anything, you should, simply because this isn't something that you're going to learn in a day. Like, it's something that you need to practice and, like, keep doing and, like, get more comfortable with that aspect of it.
Yeah. I just feel like... I don't know. I feel like I was hoping for something that would be more... I could see the connection of how it could be implemented, and a lot of the things in improv, I don't think are actually things you can actually implement into a magic performance. Like if someone asks you, you have a deck of cards there, and they're like, "Are those cards from India?" I mean, I guess I could yes and that and whatever, and that could be funny, but I don't feel like that's easily implementable.
I think what it's more for you, what this should be is more of an exercise of like just kind of like loosening your mind and not being so, I don't know, firm and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I guess stiff on stage and like being a little more relaxed and like just like being able to tap into just like an open thinking process where you can respond with something that isn't necessarily immediately related to what you were doing. And still keep your flow going with your tricks and stuff. Yeah,
that's exactly what I did take away from this, and like the whole second circle mentality. I don't know. We'll see if I'll do it again. It was a lot of fun, and I did go to the Magic Castle a couple times this week. As you know, I've been trying to put together this for the last year, a magic act, and I feel like I've been doing more talking about it and trying to I want it to be perfect, guys. I want I see a lot of magic acts at the Magic Castle, and this is I'm not putting down anybody, but it's a lot of things of like it's just a trick followed by a trick followed by a trick, and I really want this to have a structure and have a story, and I think that's why I come from the world of our world of writing and movies and TV, and I think I'm just putting too much thought into this. And I talked to some magicians at the Magic Castle this past week. I had to like sit down with them, and they basically just told me that I'm grinding my gears too much, and I should just get down there in what they call the basement, which is the cellar at the Magic Castle, where they have impromptu rooms where you can perform for audiences. They just think I should just do it, just like get a bunch of tricks together, do it, and just start getting experience, because I'm going to learn more from that than, spending all this time.
Yeah, because when you do it, you'll see what works and what doesn't in front of a crowd, and see like what needs to be reworked and that kind of thing. Because that's something that comedians do all the time, is they're trying new material, seeing what works, tightening up jokes and that kind of thing. And I'm sure you have to do the same thing with magic stuff.
Yeah, I can see how you could get so stuck in development. I mean, I have gotten so stuck in development with this. So I think I'm just going to do that. So this week I'm going to put together an act and just go down there and throw myself to the wolves and do it. I mean, I can totally do that. I want to be proud of my act. And I feel like just putting stuff together, I won't be proud of it. But I think I will benefit more, like you said, from just getting the work on it and getting experience. Brad, you were in Utah. What are you doing there?
So I came out here a little bit early before Sundance because my girlfriend's sister was getting married, and the wedding happened to be the weekend before Sundance started. So I came out here. a lot of her. I said before, my girlfriend is from Zimbabwe, but she's been living in Utah for 10 years, and she has other family here, several sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins. But some of the family who still lives in Zimbabwe obviously came in for the wedding, so I'm meeting her parents and other relatives who don't live here, and all that sort of thing. So it's been a big, busy affair, which also included all of this errands pretty much since the day I got here, running errands nonstop, setting up for the wedding, setting up for the reception. And this was kind of a new experience as far as wedding for me because my girlfriend and most of her family are Mormon. And so when it comes to Mormon weddings, if you get married in the temple, not everybody is necessarily allowed in the temple. So for the wedding part of it, you're actually waiting outside of the temple for them to come out, and then you like take the pictures and that kind of thing. And then after that, we had just a regular reception, but all the setup for that took a few hours. All the setting up of flowers and dishes and decorations and all that stuff. So it was a long, exhausting day, but it was really, really fun. The reception was a blast. Meeting her family was really cool, and yeah, it's been a busy, exhausting week, but thankfully I feel pretty recovered from the weekend now. And now just looking forward to getting exhausted again for Sundance. And part of my experience during the wedding, too, was something that I wasn't expecting, but my girlfriend kind of convinced me and poked and prodded me to do was I got a pedicure for the first time, which, the more masculine side of me is like, that's not really something guys do very often. But you know what? After I did it, I'm kind of a fan. And it's actually something that I've probably needed for a while. Not to get too like gross or anything like that, but like everyone.
Wait, pedicure is your feet, right?
Yes, yeah. And so not to get too gross, but like I've had dry skin on my feet before and that kind of thing, and sometimes like everyone knows like there's like the stones that you can use to scrape it off and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily like give my feet TLC where I'm like giving very meticulously clipping my finger nail beds or anything like that. And so this was like a nice thing. It was like a full thing where like they even like put lotion on your feet and like they did this like warm stone like scrub on my legs and stuff. And it was really nice. And so I feel like every now and then I might take advantage of this and like go get a pedicure because it was actually really relaxing and nice.
One of the magic books I read says that I should go get, I do close-up magic, and they suggest that you should go get a manicure just to feel what it feels like to have that done, and I've resisted that. But Brad, even though it was a pedicure, you're kind of talking me into this.
I have no idea how the manicure is like. I would imagine it's the same way because I what I understand they do a similar thing where they like do lotion and like treat your hands and like do like a massage and a rub and stuff like that. It could very well be worth it.
Have any of the other men on this podcast gotten pedicures or manicures before?
No.
Okay then.
I've gotten a mani-pedi. Yeah, I've only gotten a mani-pedi once, actually. I'm not huge with mani-pedis, but it's really relaxing. I've done massages a lot, but they, with a pedicure and a manicure, like they do the massages, sometimes like oils or lotions, and it's really nice and it feels very refreshing.
Very cool. HT, what have you been up to this week?
So I went to the preview event for the Alita Battle Angel Passport to Iron City experience. So this is an immersive experience that's being held in New York, LA, and Austin. And it's sort of kind of like part escape room, part sort of like theme park experience in which you go into these like recreations of settings from the film Alita Battle Angel, which is directed by Robert Rodriguez. And you can play like little games and other sort of puzzles and challenges to win the most points over other teams. So you're like put into teams with other people, and immediately you go in and there's like a bar. That's the recreation of the Kansas City bar. Yeah, the Kansas bar. And, there are drinks and stuff there. But right off the bat, you have to like go to these tablets and sort of read more info about what is going to happen. And then you go into the proper marketplace area, and there's like a booth in which there's a scrapyard, and you have to find like the most worthy scraps and get the most points. Or you go to a booth where you smell like these vials and you have to guess the smell. So it's those kind of fun games like that. And it was really cool. The design was amazing and really meticulous. And they had actors there who really dedicated themselves to the parts of people in a dystopian future who are living in like the steampunk version of the world. So it was fun, yeah.
This kind of sounds a little bit like the Westworld experience that Jacob did last year at South by Southwest, but with a game, more gamified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely gamified. Oh, and it opens this week, Los Angeles on the 23rd, New York on the 26th, and then Austin on the 29th.
How can people go to this?
So you have to buy tickets, and they can be purchased at the AlitaExperience.com website.
Very cool. Ben, what have you been up to?
So last week I went to an evening with Ludwig Göransson, and Göransson is the film composer. You might know his work. He did the scores for TV shows like Community and Happy Endings and New Girl, and recently he did the scores for Venom and Black Panther. And Black Panther was sort of the focus of this particular event. It was held at the what is the name of this place? The Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts in Beverly Hills. So it's like a really nice theater venue. And Elvis Mitchell from Film Independent did like a Q&A with the composer. And it was a night that it was basically like a mixture of behind the scenes, like featurettes from Black Panther and clips from the movie and stuff that were shown on the screen, and like live performances that he composed and played on the stage in front of us. And he had a lot of his collaborators who worked on creating the score for Black Panther from Africa. He brought them to this event, and they were doing, drum performances and stuff like that. There was one thing that was in particular that really stood out to me. They had what was called the talking drum, which is an instrument that I've never heard of, but it's like a specific type of drum where you can manipulate the pitch of the drum sound as you hit it. And it's sort of like in this African culture, it sort of like creates letters. And they were saying that and words, and they were saying that the certain type of talking drum noise that they would create with this drum that they did on stage a bunch of times during this thing, they actually used it in the movie. And it was like, if you were to transcribe it into a word, it would be the word T'Challa, which is the lead character in Black Panther. And they played this song, this little note, I guess, thousands of times throughout the movie, like when he was on camera and stuff. And so there's like a ton of things like that I learned about how seriously he went and how deep he went into the research aspect of creating the score for Black Panther that just adds all these different layers to the movie that you wouldn't really notice as a traditional viewer, but knowing about it, it just sort of enriches the experience even more. Göransson is also famous for working with Childish Gambino on a bunch of his albums. He's been nominated, or maybe even won a few. I think he's been nominated for 3 Grammys over the years, but he's produced a ton of Gambino's albums. And he also produced the song Redbone. He co-wrote that song with him. And at the very end of the night, Elvis Mitchell, the host, asked Göransson to perform that song for the audience. And then they surprised everybody by bringing Childish Gambino out, and they performed a new version of Redbone, which is the song that was in Get Out. It was like a huge radio hit a couple years ago. Ludwig Göransson's wife is a violinist, and she sort of did this new string-heavy arrangement for that song. And obviously, as soon as Gambino came out, the crowd like lost their shit. And so yeah, it was just really cool. They just did that one song, and that was like the the capper of the evening. But it was very cool. And there was another thing put on by Film Independent, which I've talked about before. They're a great organization, and if you guys are in Los Angeles, I would highly recommend looking into them. Filmindependent.org. They have like all sorts of events like this going on all throughout the year.
Yeah, and you should look into it because they often sell out way in advance. So
yes,
get on it. Let's move into what we've been reading. Let's start with Chris, because you have up a few books that you've been reading in preparation for Sundance, correct?
Yes, I have 2 books. I read 2 full books over the weekend. Anyone who's listened to the show several times knows by now probably that I am very afraid of flying. And I'm not talking like a mild nervousness. I'm talking like a debilitating terror deep in my bones, where I just the thought. Like recently, I had to drop my wife off at the airport because she was flying somewhere, and just driving to the airport, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. That's how bad this is. So obviously, I have to get on a plane this week to go to Sundance. So I said, I can't keep living like this. I need to start, approaching this head on. So I read 2 different books. One was called Flying Without Fear, and one was called Flying with Confidence. The Flying with Confidence one was written by this pilot from British Airways, and British Airways actually has a course they teach for people who are afraid of flying. And so this is like that course in book form. And it really did not help me at all. I was actually getting like heart palpitations reading the book. So that didn't help. And then Flying Without Fear helped a little bit more because it was better written, I guess. And but it, obviously it did not cure me. So I'm just going to have to,
Wait, what kind of strategies does it give you to try to overcome this? I'm curious.
There's like breathing exercises. There's this one thing which I am going to do where you basically put a rubber band around your hand and you snap it anytime you're like having like panicky thoughts, and that basically snaps you out of them.
I've actually seen people do that on a plane before.
Yeah, and the other thing it did is the books basically give Q&As to like every question you might have about what if the plane does this, and it explains that pretty much everything is normal, even the sounds you hear are normal, and you just have to learn to just push it away and stop panicking over it. But that's easier said than done.
Well, hopefully it is a better experience going to Utah. How long is that flight for you?
It is 4 hours.
Nice
and short.
Well, you can put 2 movies on your iPad.
Yes, that's my plan, and also to take a bunch of pills, and we'll see how it goes.
Self-medication is always the answer.
Yes, yeah.
Jacob, while HT has been immersing yourself in the Battle Angel experience, you have actually been reading the books.
Last week I touched on after I read a little bit of the original manga, and now I blitzed through the first 3 hardcover collections and ordered the 4th one this morning. It's incredibly addictive, and the storytelling hasn't necessarily gotten more complex. It's still very straightforward. Alita, the cyborg, pisses somebody off. They have a fight. Alita wins, and another fight happens. Alita wins. But even with the pattern of like that, I'm impressed by how the series is unafraid to burn down what happened before. Like every time you think it's entered, a holding pattern. Oh, so it's going to be for a little bit. It kind of destroys everything, wipes it out, and moves on to something else. So even though when it's predictable, even when the characters are simple, and the storytelling itself is simple, it's always rapidly changing. It refuses to let you get bored, and it's very silly. It's very fun. It is sometimes sexist and racist in the way you would imagine, early '90s Japanese manga to be. But I'm surprised by how invested I am in these characters, how invested I am in this world, and how much I want to know more and learn more. Like I said, it's sometimes very silly. It's the kind of manga where the characters shout their special attacks as they do them. The art keeps on getting better, like with each volume. And 3 hardcovers, I believe, are the first 6 volumes you read in paperback. By the way, for those of you who read them that way, but it actually has me more and more interested in the movie because I've gone from being hesitant about the movie to being cautiously optimistic because
the early buzz has been quite very positive.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that, and like some of the like designs and the characters. Like now that I've read the manga, I look at some of the cyborg designs and realize, oh, this is actually incredibly accurate to how they're drawn. I mean, I don't know if Rodriguez can capture the sense of speed and action that the comic has. The way it's drawn, like I've never seen like battles, like robot-driven battles drawn in a way that make them feel this fast and kinetic before on the page. So I'm very curious to see if CGI and putting it on 3D can like really replicate how incredibly intense the action of the manga is. But seeing how Rodriguez and his team have actually really recreated the look of that world, we can argue whether or not the effects look good, whether or not the CGI Alita looks good. That's something that's up for debate right now. But the overall basic designs really feel torn out of the page in a good way. So I'm not going to go around saying I'm suddenly a super fan of this thing I started reading a week ago, but I'm definitely a fan. I really like it. And if you like, really good action comics, the hardcovers, I think they're normally $30 each, but they're all on Amazon for like $19 or $20, and they're incredibly fun, and they're only getting better as you go along.
Very cool. Ben, what have you been reading?
So over the past, I think it's probably taken me like maybe 2.5 months to read The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is a very long novel that I just have not devoted the time to, sit down and read. I'm sure I could have read it quicker, but I've had a lot going on, with the holidays and everything. But I finally finished this book. It's by Michael Chabon, and it is, okay, so the premise of the book is it's about these two cousins, one of which is a refugee from Prague, I believe, who grows up like studying magic and the art of being an escape artist. And
I'm interested.
Yeah, he comes to New York City in 1939 and lives with his cousin, who is the son of a strong man who wandered around like the vaudeville circuit, and the two of them create their own superhero comic book, and it sort of traces their careers in parallel with the rise of superhero comics in America. So it's like historical fiction, because occasionally they will bounce around the city and meet with actual real people. Like Stan Lee makes a cameo at one point, and I'm trying to think who else. Orson Welles shows up briefly. They go to the premiere of Citizen Kane, and that movie influences how they work on their comics. There's a lot of Jewish mysticism and stuff weaved in. There's a lot of talk about how Batman and Robin and forgetting the guy's name. I think it's Frederick Wortham, who there was a big case you guys may have read about the this is an actual thing that happened, how he testified before Congress and wrote a book talking about how comics were promoting homosexuality and stuff because of characters like Batman and Robin, and how Robin is Batman's ward, and there's all this subtext in there about them having a gay relationship and all that stuff. That real actual thing is weaved into this book in a really interesting way because of the sexuality of one of the main characters. I don't really want to say too much about it, just because hopefully Peter, some of you are intrigued by this, and I would say it's worth reading. It's just it's very detailed. It's very long. I loved all of the crossover moments with those, actual artists and Hollywood figures, and I liked the story as a whole. I think it gets a little too detailed for me at times. I would have been fine if this book cut 100 pages out of it or something. But I know I'm not the only one on this podcast who's read this book, so I want to hear from. I think Jacob, you've probably read this, right?
Yeah, this book's incredible. It's been a while since I've read it, but it's if you're interested in comics or American pop culture from the 30s through the 50s, this is a vital tome. It is just uses comics to explore America during that time period in a way that is fascinating and gripping, and all the things you want out of a really good book. I know that they've tried to adapt into a movie many times, and I think it's probably impossible. It's too detailed, too rich, and too much happens. It is really worth tracking down a copy.
I was going to say, it's actually funny that Scott Rudin, I think, pitched this to Paramount. They bought the rights after Chabon only had a 1.5 page treatment for this book. So that was in the early 2000s, and I think there was talk of Tobey Maguire and Jamie Bell and Natalie Portman being in this film, and then there was Andrew Garfield, Ryan Gosling. It went through a whole bunch of different evolutions, and there's even, I think, in the early 2010s they were talking about making it a television miniseries instead of a film. So I'm wondering, I'm wondering if do you think it could happen as that, or do you think it's still not even like good? Like it's still not adaptable, even like in an 8 or 10 episode like HBO series.
It covers such a long period of history that I was shocked that there was even talk that they could adapt it in any form at all, because it's just such a long period that it would seem like you would have to do some digital de-aging or like some old age makeup or something, because the characters go through so much over the course of the story. But yeah, I guess maybe like an HBO show or something like that. I could see that, like a limited series. Jacob, if this property were to be adapted in some form, what would you want to see it take?
Oh man, a miniseries to HBO is probably the best bet, because I feel like that as a network, they have their act together when it comes to miniseries. Nobody does them better. I think it's gonna be a case where you got a True Detective season 1. You gotta get one guy to write all the episodes. You get one person to direct all of it. I feel like it's gotta be 10 hours. It's gonna be a singular vision from a singular team. It can't be scattershot. It really is way too focused of a source material to try to say like, let's get 10 different directors to make this a TV show. I feel like it's gotta be something that connects with a single filmmaker who can bring out all things that feel so personal in the book. It can't be a committee thing. That's and I think HBO, they specialize in that. They do a lot of miniseries that are by a handful of creatives behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. So I think that if they were to do it, that's the best bet.
Yeah, and the book is more comics based than magic based, Peter. But I still think there's enough magic stuff in there
like
that you might.
Things.
I know, but I know that like I'm sure you haven't really read any like a bunch of mainstream, best-selling novels that involve magic, and this is one of them. So, I'd recommend checking it out for you in particular.
Very cool. Let's move on to what we've been watching. I will first start off with Titan Games, because Jacob was talking about this, I think, last week on the Water Cooler. Is that correct?
That or the week before, probably.
Yeah, and this is the show by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson that is basically his kind of like American Ninja Warrior style show, but it's for kind of like regular, everyday people, I guess. It's kind of, not regular people, but people that are not athletes in their like everyday life, but they are extraordinarily athletic in a way. Is that probably fair to say?
Yeah, amateur athletes is probably the word you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's interesting about this show is how every one of the games involved here are designed and presented in this very like epic and huge way. Every single thing is like this gigantic spectacle of like what you would imagine if like the Roman, games existed today. And I know the show spends a lot of time on trying to show these emotional stories from the participants, and I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like that plays a little second fiddle to the enormity of the challenges. That's what I'm really in it for, but I totally get, reality, sports TV, like people get into those kind of the human stories at the center there. The 6 or 8 challenges designed by The Rock each take on different strengths. Like some require upper muscle, some require leg muscle, and some require a combination of both. And I'm actually kind of wondering like how they choose. And I'm wondering, Jacob, if they've explained this, because I've only seen the first episode, how they choose when someone gets picked, like everybody applied to be on this games, and the people that like made it through to actually the shows. I wonder how it's chosen which of the games that they actually compete in, because not everybody's competing in the same games. And I feel like that would put some people at a disadvantage against others, because some of these games seem to me to be harder than other games. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's something that my wife and I were talking about just the most recent episode, because there have been a few cases now where there'll be somebody who has a strength-based challenge for their first game, and we've all smashing concrete with a sledgehammer to make something lighter so you can lift it up over your head, kind of challenges. And those are the kind of challenges where like somebody who's an enormous bodybuilder type excels at. But the moment that my bodybuilder moves on to the next round, and he's forced to do a challenge where he requires agility, the guy who's more well-rounded, who's also agile and lighter on his feet, like destroys the bodybuilder. So it definitely something I wondered that too, if it's randomly assigned, or if they maybe try to play their strengths at first. But definitely the overall challenge, like the every episode ends with this climbing up this mountain of obstacles.
Olympus.
Mount Olympus, yes.
Which makes like the aggro crag from Guts look like a toy for kindergartners.
Yeah, it is the aggro crag on steroids, possibly literally. But it is very much it is challenging both agility and strength. So the guys who are pure strength in the first round tend to like really falter on against when they're asked to like leap over things. So it's a very good question, Peter. I wanted that too, but definitely the more well-rounded athletes, guys who can run as well as lift, are the ones who are excelling so far.
I like it. I'm going to keep on watching it. My other complaint about it is I feel like so far when I've seen people on this like Mount Olympus, it's a 1-versus-1 kind of competition to the end of Mount Olympus, and I feel like I think it would gain if they could make Mount Olympus so that it's 4 people competing for one winner instead of 2 people, because when I've seen it, it seemed like most of the time there's one person clearly in the lead, and they never, the other person never catches up, and that's just not dramatic for television. But has that been a problem on subsequent episodes?
Some of them not, because the way it works, for those of you listening at home who haven't watched this, is that there are 2 men compete in one challenge, and the winner moves on, and 2 men compete again, and 2 different men compete, and the 2 winners of those 2 men do Mount Olympus, and then in the same episode, 2 women compete, and 2 more women compete, and those women go up Mount Olympus. So ultimately, you're having grand finale of 2 mountain climbs, one for the men and one for the women, and I'd say maybe about 65% of the time so far it's been neck and neck, and then 35% of the time there's that one guy who can't get over that one thing. So it's probably an issue that could be smoothed out in a season 2, or maybe something that will resolve when they take all the winners back. Because the idea is at the end of the season all the winners will come back and compete against each other. And so my guess is that maybe there'll be some stumbling blocks early on, but when they bring back all the previous winners who've already beaten the mountain and ask them to compete against each other is when it's going to get really good.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of The Rock, and I love the endless positivity that he has, and he's just like, he's like, I wish he made like, what do you call those? Like those, Tony Robbins, like,
motivational videos.
Yeah, I feel like I would want to listen to The Rock giving me encouragement, motivational videos. I feel like that would be, I don't know. He's above that though, right? So, yeah. Okay, let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about the Fyre Festival, because this doesn't happen often. Throughout history, there has been movies that have been in parallel development. We've seen A Bug's Life and Ants, and Deep Impact and Armageddon and stuff like that. And it happens probably more often with documentaries, because that is based on real life happenings. So there's 2 documentaries that were in parallel development about the Fyre Festival, and but it's kind of unusual to have both of them hit within like a week period. I don't know if that's ever happened before, but and this one was really a showdown of the streaming services. One was on Netflix, one was on Hulu. For those of you who have been underneath a rock, the Fyre Festival was this high-end musical festival that was supposed to be held on a private island in the Bahamas that was once owned by Pablo Escobar, and it was going to be the new Coachella, and it ended up being a disaster of epic proportions. To be honest here, I knew about the Fyre Festival. I'd seen some of the memes online when, everything went wrong and people were making fun of kind of like the rich kids stuck in, basically a parking lot with tents and stuff like that. But I didn't really know much beyond that, because I really didn't feel the interest to read into it. I don't know why. So these 2 documentaries were very fascinating to me, because it really let me in on the whole story. One of them, the one on Hulu is called, what is it called? Fyre Fraud? Yeah.
Yes.
That's produced by F. Jerry, the company that helped market the festival.
Yeah, actually, it's the Netflix one that's produced by F. Jerry.
Sorry, I'm confusing it. Yeah, the Netflix one is called Fyre. Actually, it has a subtitle of some kind, right? It's Fyre.
It's like the greatest party that never happened or something like that.
Yeah, that one is produced by F. Jerry, the company who helped market the festival and is named in some of the lawsuits against the festival. The Hulu doc was the one that's called Fyre Fraud. It paid some money to Billy McFarland, the guy that was in charge of this and I guess scammed people out of their money. So it's unclear how much they paid him. I think Billy says that it was $250,000. I think the filmmakers have said it's much less than that. So both of them kind of have the interesting prospect that they are, there's some,
ethically compromised.
Yeah, ethically compromised, I think is probably the best phrase of it. It is interesting because the Netflix one, the one that is partially produced by F. Jerry, I think tries to paint them and the influencers who are hired for the marketing campaign as people who are also conned by Billy, where the Hulu one, I think, kind of shows that F. Jerry had a lot of insight that things were going south long before they decided to not be a part of that festival. I think the Fyre one on Netflix for me is better. It looks better. It has more footage. It's directed by Chris Smith, who is the filmmaker behind one of my favorite documentaries of all time, American Movie. If you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend go checking that out. And he also directed one of my favorite films of 2017, Jim and Andy. The other one, Fyre Fraud, it's good, but it has these weird, I don't know, like I feel like it's not as well, like the footage is not as well framed. The interviews are not as well presented. They have like these, they read from court transcripts and they use like this text to speech program rather than having someone actually read what it says, and it just comes off kind of like a disjointed mess. But I feel like both have their own advantages, and I feel like both of these documentaries are 90 minutes long, and I feel like if you need to see both of them to kind of essentially get the whole story. I feel like if someone could edit these two documentaries into 1 2-hour documentary, I feel like that would be the best of both worlds. That's obviously not going to happen. The Fyre documentary on Netflix also had like, it was interesting because I think it's the first documentary I saw that like had noticeable score from movies. Like it was using the score from Gone Girl and maybe even some stuff from The Social Network, which I guess made it more cinematic. And that one also had some footage, some intimate footage from the NYC Access Tickets scandal that the Hulu doc didn't have. So I don't know. I'd recommend people see both of them. I know I'm not the only one who watched both these this weekend. HT, you watched both of them, right?
Yes, I did. Admittedly, I watched both of them while drinking lots of wine, so I don't remember all the details. But I agree with you in that I think that these films are best watched together because they complement each other. And while I think the Netflix film Fyre is a little more sleek than the other one, it does have that sort of shadow of accountability or unaccountability to it because it's produced by the F. Jerry guys. Whereas Fyre Fraud is more, it approaches it more as an overall fraud and kind of has a stronger timeline of all the events, but doesn't quite get some of the more human interest elements that Fyre does. Also, it kind of annoyed me that Fyre Fraud said millennials like a million times. I'm like, okay, I get it. Millennials are the worst. Got it.
You were responsible for this. It's your fault.
I know, apparently it's my fault. I had no idea who half these influencers are, quote unquote influencers. So this is a whole world that was very unfamiliar to me. And I remember only hearing about Fyre Fraud, or not Fyre Fraud, about the Fyre Festival when it all went to shit, essentially. And that was a great moment of like short-term food for everyone. But this was definitely like a world to which I am not I'm not familiar with. So I feel like I'm absolved of this, I think, in some ways. But I do want to say before I finish wrapping up my thing, it sounds like a lot of us had a lit weekend.
I didn't know anybody in this documentary except for Ja Rule, who I know, in the Vegas. I've heard his name before. I couldn't even tell you what songs he does. Both of these documentaries also try to say something about the potential problem of influencers and the FOMO exclusive Instagram lifestyle of millennials. Mm-hmm. But I don't think either of them kind of nail it. Chris, you saw both of these documentaries as well, right?
Yes, I did. I really have nothing new to add. Everything you both said pretty much mirrors my my opinion of the films. I enjoyed watching them. I do think you should watch both to get the full picture. I also think everyone involved in both these movies is terrible, and I'm sad to share a world with them. But that's where we are.
Jacob, you only watched the Hulu one, Fyre Fraud, right?
Yeah, I feel really stupid, but the main reason I didn't watch the Netflix one is the Hulu one, when it has this big wrap-up of, here's where everybody is now. It shows the F. Jerry guys and says, they're currently working on their own documentary, and I'm like, oh, that's a Netflix one. F those guys, they're such monsters, not going to watch the Netflix one. So I had that kind of visceral reaction, which is unfair, considering that apparently, they're both very different movies, very different intentions. But Fyre Fraud does present the F. Jerry guys as being so complicit, and being villains of the story, in addition to Billy McFarland. I mean, I know people are going to ride Fyre Fraud for paying money to Billy McFarland to do interviews, but for me, it ends up being worth it because every single time Billy McFarland is on screen in this movie, he is collecting all of his own rope and hanging himself. And every single time he opens his mouth, he is just revealing himself to be this fraudulent con artist, criminal idiot. And it frames the entire thing as being the work of this bro-tastic douchebag. It makes you wonder, how did this happen? And I have not seen Fyre. You guys can happily chime in and tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's a very, very important part of this, to know that Billy McFarland was no tactical genius. He was no elite businessman with a solid plan. He was a dumb kid out to form a criminal enterprise, and was every step of the way bumbling his way upwards before he tumbled off the tower and fell and splattered to a business death. And not having that, I feel like it would be a problem. I do think Fyre Fraud is occasionally a little too cute in its setup. It is, very it has a lot of pop culture references, a lot of clips to try to clarify things. Someone will mention a TV show, a clip of that TV show to sort of, sort of reinforce what they're talking about. I don't think it's always necessary, but I do think that knowing that the Netflix one, doesn't have Billy McFarland hanging himself, and doesn't have the F. Jerry guys being a vital part of this mess and knowingly making it worse, that makes me hesitant to watch it. But what do you guys think? I mean, you guys said I should watch both, and should I?
With Fyre, there are some interviews with the local island staff that really show the impact that this festival had on just the Bahamians who put their all into this work, and ended up not getting paid for a lot of it. Although there's a weird interview with one other F. Jerry person who talks about how the Bahamians put out a hit on him, which definitely seemed very wrong and irresponsible. But other than that, I think the interviews with the Bahamians are definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking out the other documentary, because it is funny how there's just little details left out by each documentary that I don't even think are intentional, in that they're trying to. The only thing I think that's intentional here is the F. Jerry produced one on Netflix does kind of just gloss over their involvement in it. They do appear in it, and it's clear that they're bro douchebags, but it doesn't really put any blame on them. Aside from that, I would say both documentaries, I think, are produced in a fair way. They really are trying to tell the story, but you're not going to get all the facts. And I feel like having a different point of view and a different angle, that's what's fascinating about this, is seeing the same story from two different angles. And I do agree with HT. seeing the hundreds of people that were involved in working on this thing and never paid, and what strife this did to that small island is kind of incredible and something worth seeing. And also, one thing that kind of hits me coming out of this documentary, and I know this probably doesn't seem obvious to a lot of people, but I'm kind of amazed that what Billy was able to do, it kind of makes me question any of these companies that are getting like VC funding in Silicon Valley, because he was literally just kind of like a used car salesman with a small idea, and he was able to, mobilize tens of millions of dollars with like no actual thing to back it up. And I guess I know a lot of people are cynical like that already, but I really didn't think that investors with millions of dollars would get involved in something like this if there wasn't something if there wasn't a foundation in place. And it really makes me question a lot of things that are, basically going on today in Silicon Valley and stuff like that, because really it could just be another Billy, with an idea, and there's nothing there, and earning millions of dollars for that idea. Like, it just, I don't know. It's scary. It's kind of scary. That's all I watched this week. Actually, I'm curious, because Brad and Ben both did not watch any of these Fyre documentaries. Is there any reason, Brad, why you have not watched them?
Honestly, I just haven't had the time, just because I've been here dealing with wedding stuff and that kind of thing, and I haven't had the time to sit down to watch them yet. But I do have both of them in their respective queues, and I will watch them as soon as I get some time.
Ben, how about you?
I was kind of curious, and then at a certain point I was like, maybe I just don't need all of this nonsense in my head. And then I saw that both of them were ethically compromised, and I was like, well, I don't know what to pick, and I don't want to watch both of them at the same time. I don't know. I opted out of the whole thing.
Opted out. Okay, cool. Brad, what have you been watching?
So as I said, I haven't had really much time. So the only things that I've watched since the last episode were a couple things on my flight over here to Utah. Mostly just catch up on things. I watched Tully, Jason Reitman's movie with Charlize Theron, and I really enjoyed it for the most part. It has a little bit of a predictable turn in it that I saw coming, but I still thought the Charlize Theron's performance was great. It's a very, I guess sort of intimate portrayal of just what life can be like as a mother and how exhausting it can be to have kids, and kind of just tapping into the idea of like losing yourself a little bit when you get caught up in just how life goes after you have children and that kind of thing. But it definitely, there are times in it that Charlize Theron's life is so stressful and miserable that it made me reconsider the idea of like ever wanting to have kids. Because it is something that I wouldn't mind having one day, like having a couple kids. But man, there's some real tough moments in this movie where I'm just like, ugh, no thanks. So yeah. Have you guys seen Tully yet? What do you guys think of it, Tully?
And, no spoilers here. I just want to say that.
Yeah. I've seen it. I really enjoyed it too for Charlize Theron's performance. And I think while the twist could have been predicted, I thought it was in keeping with the film's sort of overall themes and tones without going into spoilers. But I thought it was great, and something that left an impact on me when I got out of theater.
Yeah, for sure. It's I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And then the other thing I watched, so I watched Tully, and then our flight was ahead of schedule, so I only had a limited amount of time. So I literally looked to see what I wanted to watch and what I knew that I could finish in the time that I had left on my flight. And the best thing that fit was a documentary called The Perfect Bid: The Contestant Who Knew Too Much. And this is a documentary that I've seen just like the poster art, cover art for pop up on, I think, Amazon or Hulu, one of the places, maybe all of them, who knows. And I was interested in it simply because I'm somebody who, like everybody, grew up watching The Price is Right when they were homesick from school and still catches it every now and then. And this documentary tells the story of this guy who is responsible for a person getting a perfect bid during the showcase showdown of The Price is Right, literally to the number, the exact dollar amount. And so this tells the documentary tells the story of this guy who is a lifelong fan who has been to the show dozens of times, was a contestant, was seen on TV, like being one of the people in the crowd yelling bids and like having contestants actually listen to him and win prizes. And it kind of it's meant to be this sort of thing of clearing the air, because I never heard about this story when it happened, but apparently it was a big deal when this guy did get the perfect bid during the showcase showdown. And there was rumors that maybe there was some kind of insider cheating going on where somebody behind the scenes was giving people inside information, or that there was a group of fans who had like somehow used price lists to help other people win and that kind of thing. And there's just a whole interesting story behind it. And so it's kind of set up as this thing of clearing the air and explaining what really happened, because apparently the contestant who got the perfect bid has ties to the main person who's at the center of this story. The one thing I will say is that even though I was interested in this documentary just because I like The Price is Right and it's an interesting story, but the documentary itself is not very well produced. It feels very cheap. Sometimes like the audio from the interviews isn't that great. The production value just isn't there. But for me, it was just hearing the details of this guy's story and how it all unfolded and sort of just the history of everything that was interesting to me.
So is this worth checking out? Because this concept seems fascinating to me, and I love the 1994 movie Quiz Show, directed by Robert Redford, I think, starring John Turturro. Is this something is the quality worth getting through for the content?
I mean, if you like The Price is Right and you're interested in those kinds of things, I say yes. Like it's interesting enough that you can kind of ignore the quality. And it's short too. It's barely an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah. So it's a breeze to sit through. And so yeah, if like I said, if you like those kinds of things and you want to know the behind the scenes story of how this stuff happened, then I think it's worth checking out, even if you're just tossing it on like while you're doing something else.
Do you know where people can watch that outside of being on a plane?
Yeah, you can find it on Hulu. I just confirmed that. So if you're not on a flight, Hulu is where you can watch it.
Very cool. Jacob, what have you been watching?
In addition to Fyre Fraud, I saw an early screening of Gaspar Noé's Climax, and I'm trying to get a way to sum this movie up, and it's very difficult. Noé is the director of movies like Irreversible and Enter the Void and Love. He's a provocateur. He's very difficult. He makes films that are often hard to watch, very unrelenting, very brutal, very upsetting, and Climax very much follows that path. The basic gist here is that it follows a group of dancers, a large group of dancers, to the point where like it's hard to follow all the characters, at least on a first-time viewing, who are gathered in a isolated, abandoned building for rehearsals for some kind of dance project that's never fully explained. And the first half of the movie is them rehearsing, them partying, them drinking, them having a good time. And then around halfway through the movie, it is revealed that someone has spiked the sangria they've been drinking with LSD, and things go very, very badly for everyone, and you start plummeting to the lowest possible depths of humanity you can possibly imagine. And I described this on Twitter as Step Up as directed by Satan, and I stand by that description. It is deeply upsetting, and it starts off, with literally this massive, amazing, unbroken crane shot of this incredible dance number. Like, it puts most movie dance numbers to shame. If the movie was a full-fledged musical, it would be spectacular. And the true Gaspar Noé fashion, he continues to use these extremely long, complicated shots that feel like they feel impossible. I mean, once the LSD reveal happens, the movie becomes one shot. And I'm sure there are cuts hidden there, but I can't tell you where at this point. And it becomes this one long, disorienting shot, following various characters as they freak out, become paranoid, turn on each other, and just it becomes hell on earth. The colors of all the rooms become garish. Violence breaks out. Horrible, ugly truths are revealed, and just genuinely bad things start happening. And right now, I'm not sure if I'm stupid or if the movie is just too vague. I'm not sure what the point of it all is. Like, I can't tell you that I understand what Climax is trying to tell me, other than, don't put LSD in the sangria. But I'll admit that I was completely gripped by it from at least when things started going to hell. I was completely gripped by it. It's a little bit slow going on, especially when post dancing and pre freak out is sometimes a little hard to get through. It's a little not quite dull, but I wasn't quite engaged with the characters because I didn't know their names, couldn't keep track of who was who because there's so many people. But by the time things have gone south, and by the time Noe is pulling so many tricks out of his back pocket to do horrible things to his characters in these unbroken takes that feel like impossible. Like there are effects in this movie that, because it's done in one take with no cuts, I don't know how they did it. I mean, I don't know how this violence is being staged. I don't know how these sequences are being put together. I straight up do not comprehend how it's being done. So from a technical point of view, if you want just a mesmerizingly awful experience, like a movie that just puts you into a bad place for a long time and puts it and films it in a way that's impossible to understand how it's being done, it's entirely gripping. And on those grounds, I can recommend it. But it's definitely for adventurous people only. It's something else, man. If you've seen his previous movies, he does really wild things with opening credit scenes. They come when you don't expect them and are presented in ways you don't expect. The movie begins where it ends and flashes back, and it runs the closing credits first after the closing shot of the movie, and then flashes back. And it's that kind of movie. It sets out to really unsettle you, upset you, and throw you off. And A24 is releasing it in March. And I'm not going to say go out and see. I'm not going to say everyone go see Climax, but if you are like super adventurous, if you're the kind of filmmaker film fan who admires technique, who admires being tested, who admires like experiences that are going to leave you scarred but in ways you want to talk about, Climax is really something else. And when we do next year's list of 50 greatest moments of the year, or it's going to be like 5 or 6 moments from Climax right off the top of my head that are just like forever burned in my brain. I'm curious, anybody else catch that at Fest? I know I played a lot of Fest last year.
No, and I generally do not like this filmmaker, but I am a fan of single shot stuff and the craft. And Jacob, I hate you because you're making me want to see this, and I know I'm going to hate it. And should I just pretend that it doesn't exist?
I would pretend it doesn't exist, Peter. I don't think it's for you, but it's like there's stuff in this movie, man. I freaking don't know how they did this movie. I don't know how this movie was made. Like I can watch a lot of movies with a lot of unbroken long shots and a lot of chaos happening in long shots, but I straight up there's stuff happening in this movie that's subtle, like subtle things that aren't like in your face. That like when I think back on it, I go, I don't know how they pulled that off. I don't know how they staged that, and because of that, it feels real in a way that was upsetting in a way that most movie violence or movie, disturbing sequences don't hit me the way this one did.
Regrettably, it sounds like I'm going to have to see this, Jacob.
I would recommend seeing in theaters. I can't imagine it playing at home. At home where you can pause it and look away and have surrounded by dogs and cats or family members, it's not going to play the same. But in a theater where you're held hostage by it, I feel like that's really the only way to see this. Like I would never watch a No Way movie at home. I've tried watching Enter the Void at home after seeing it in theaters, and it's not the same thing. So if you see this, look for it in March. Try to track it down. And I'm not saying you can't enjoy it at home, but I'm saying that I can't imagine it being the same at home.
Okay, what else have you been watching, Jacob?
Well, we're running really long, so I'm going to blitz through my last few. True Detective Season 3. It's good. It's not as like lightning in a bottle amazing as Season 1. And as a person who's quoted on the box, on the Blu-ray box for Season 2, as one of the few defenders, it's not as funhouse, crazy, wacky, we're making this shit up as we go, insanity of Season 2. I'm one of the very few defenders of that. But it's a very compelling mystery. Mahershala Ali is really, really good playing the same character in 1980, 1990, and 2015. Like he's playing different ages really well. And I'm drawn in by the mystery. I want to know where it goes. True Detective is good again. Or it's good in a traditional sense again because Season 2 is good for weirdos like me. I watched Practical Magic for the first time. One of my wife's favorite movies. It's really cute. I liked it. I think that it's, as far as rom-coms go, more rom-coms should have magic and murder and ghosts and people being resurrected from the dead. More of that, please. I rewatched Halloween for her first time since Fantastic Fest. My wife's first time watching it. Movie holds up at home. It's great. My wife thinks that the whole Doctor subplot works, so suck it.
Jacob, your wife is right about everything ever except for this.
And finally, I start my annual rewatch of Game of Thrones to prepare for the new season. Every year before the new season of Game of Thrones, we rewatch all the previous episodes.
Wait, you're rewatching the entire series?
The entire series.
That is insane.
Yeah, I watched 4 episodes in a row while painting figures. We'll get to that in a second. Later last night. And Game of Thrones, season 1, even on this much smaller budget, when the show is mostly, 20 people talking in rooms, it's still really, really good. And as much as I love the big budget show it's become, there are days where I kind of miss when Game of Thrones was a show about people whispering in rooms. I miss those days slightly. But, it holds up really well. Still one of my favorite shows of all time. And I'm eager to get through the whole thing again.
Very cool. And everybody can watch that on HBO Go or HBO, what's the other one? Now, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben, what have you been watching?
I watched Police Story 2. Last week I talked about the first Police Story, and Criterion is doing 4K restorations of both of these movies. So I had never seen either one, and I asked them for screeners, and so I got a chance to check this out. And they're actually they're re-releasing them in theaters. They're going to be on February 1st. Both movies are going to be playing at the Alamo Drafthouse in downtown Brooklyn, and then on March 8th they're going to be at the New Art in Los Angeles. And I think there's supposed to be like a national rollout after that. But if you can't catch them in theaters, they're going to be available for purchase through the Criterion Collection on April 30th of this year. So I would say if you're a fan of martial arts movies, of Jackie Chan's early films, these are like instant purchases. Like there's no, I'm shocked and embarrassed that it's taken me this long to get around to seeing these two movies, because they're really incredible. The second one opens with a recap of like the best stunt moments from the first film, partly as like a plot refresher, but also partly as like a flex, like telling the audience that this one is going to be better. Like, yeah, here's a highlight reel. Get a load of what's coming now. And I'm not quite sure that the second one actually lives up to that standard. It has an incredible action in it, as you would expect, but I think the first one is just it's like really inventive with the action. The second one feels just as impressive, but maybe a little bit more situation dependent. For example, the final climax is set in a huge warehouse, and it just seems like it's a little bit more designed, if that makes sense. Like, oh, here's the part where we throw guys through 1 million barrels that happen to be laying around in here. Here's the part where fireworks go off because, of course, there are fireworks in this abandoned, warehouse. So in terms of like the plot, I think I would recommend Police Story 1 over 2, but both movies are really like invaluable in terms of 1980s action classics that are not from America. So I would highly recommend them. I think a couple things I really appreciate about both of these movies are that during the fights, Jackie Chan gets hit all the time. Like people don't just attack him one at a time like the traditional martial arts movie cliche. He's like constantly actually getting hit, which is you don't see that often in these types of movies. And also, it's not just him that's pulling off like the incredible moves. Like all of the henchmen and stuff that he's fighting against are doing flying jump kicks and like really impressive moves too. And I feel like in more modern, like a Tony Jaa style martial arts film, it's really like he's the superstar and everybody else is like clearly a level or two below him. But it seems like it's one of those things where it seems like if you were to follow the story of one of these random henchmen who was actually also really good at martial arts, there might be like a whole separate franchise in there, because this person seems almost just as capable as Jackie Chan's character does. So anyway, Police Story 2 available.
The Police Story cinematic universe that they missed out on.
Yeah, exactly. So those are available on April 30th and coming to the theaters, like I said, before that. I also saw Bad Times at the El Royale. I know Chris talked about this last week, so I'm not going to go too long on it. But, man, I really like Drew Goddard as a filmmaker. I think he is a really, really smart writer-director. I enjoy this movie a great deal. I do think, to echo what Chris said last week, it's a little bit long, but I loved Jeff Bridges and Cynthia Erivo's dynamic. I loved John Hamm in this movie, Chris Hemsworth. Like I think Chris said last week that, there's at least one plot line that he wouldn't mind seeing removed entirely. I liked all of the plot lines. I just wish the whole thing could have been a little bit tighter because it feels like it drags just a little bit. But the concept is so great. It's set in this hotel where it's completely split in half, where one side is California, one side is in Nevada, and there's I was watching a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, and just the production design elements are really impressive for what they did in terms of lighting and all of that stuff there. So, I would definitely recommend this movie. I think if I would have caught it last year, it might have ended up like maybe squeezing into my top 15 or something. So that is Bad Times at the El Royale. I got it. I think it's available on VOD and all that now. I got it through the Netflix disc plan. I also watched Hotel Artemis on a plane, and this is the movie that I was catching a lot of flack for basically being like a ripoff of the John Wick movies. It's set in a hotel where Jodie Foster plays a nurse who tends to the wounds of assassins and people who are in like a futuristic crime syndicate, basically. Like they're members of this specific hotel, and they're able to come to her to recuperate after particular injuries that they gather. Jeff Goldblum is in this. The cast is really good. Jodie Foster, Sterling K. Brown, Jeff Goldblum, Brian Tyree Henry. I don't like this movie nearly as much as either of the two John Wicks. I don't know if it's a full-on ripoff, but there are tons of similarities. It feels a little weird in that regard. Drew Pearce, this is his directorial debut. The direction is fine, and I mean, he's the guy who wrote Iron Man 3. Or was one of the writers on Iron Man 3. So he has like certainly a creative streak in him, and it seems like he's going just far enough to try to separate this from the John Wick stuff that I'm not really like rolling my eyes and giving it too much side eye in terms of that angle. But I just like a lot of this movie feels very written, if you know what I'm saying. It's sort of like characters speak in ways that people would never speak in the real world, and not in like a super stylized way, like in a Tarantino movie or something. So I found it just to be, lackluster all the way around. Although I will say Sterling K. Brown is very good, and I want to see him in more leading roles. And Sofia Boutella, who I know primarily as like the metal-legged henchman from the first Kingsman movie. She was also in like Star Trek Beyond and stuff. But this was like the first movie where I was like, oh wow, she actually like could maybe lead a movie that I would be interested in watching. Like she's more than just like the stereotypical female badass, the action star kind of thing. I feel like she did a little bit of that in this movie as well. But I thought her acting was actually pretty good in this movie. So
let's not forget that Sofia Boutella is also Dark Universe's famous The Mummy. So
yeah, I never saw The Mummy. So
she's going to be the lead of that franchise.
Oh, and she's also one of the leads in Climax. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. So, man, this is a Sofia Boutella heavy podcast.
Does she play the Mummy in Climax, Jacob?
No, but she plays somebody who lots of bad things happen to.
She walks like an Egyptian during her dances.
Oh, boy.
Okay, right. Sorry. I give up. I'm done. I quit. No, and then two other movies really quickly. I had like over the past week and a half, I've had like an unwitting George Cukor triple feature. Last week I talked about Gaslight, which was really great. And then on the plane, I recently flew back to Florida. I watched The Philadelphia Story and The Women, both of which were directed by George Cukor, and I had no idea that he directed those. But I'll talk about The Women first really quickly. This movie is from 1939. It is a movie. It's the first movie I've ever seen that does not have any male characters in it at all. It stars Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, and Rosalind Russell, and it's based on a play, and the entire thing is just about like these sort of like bickering high society women, and not a single male actor appears in the entire movie, which for 1939, and also it was written by two women, I think. Anita Luce and Jane Murfin. So for 1939, that's like a jaw-dropping achievement, really. Like, I feel like I haven't seen that ever, not even in a modern context. So that's very impressive.
I just want to say a note that I think that the only time I've ever seen that happen with there's an all-female cast with no man in sight is Huit Femme, the French film Eight Women, which is a dark comedy musical, and is about a man in a way. It's like about the murder of a man, but it's only women are on screen the entire time.
Yeah, that's cool. And this movie also is sort of about men. It's these women talking about the men in their lives, and one of them is is like the mistress of one of their husbands, and it's all very like like incestual in that way, not like literally incest, but it's I mean, I don't know if it really holds up under like a modern lens. Like, there's a lot of like, for example, the husband is cheating, but he is basically like his behavior is justified by these women because this movie came out in 1939 and it was just like more societally acceptable for men to cheat on their wives back then. It was just like a given, I guess. So, if you're watching it through a 2019 lens and trying to apply like today's standards to it, I think it's going to feel a little bit lacking in that regard. But in terms of it being a 1939 movie that is like a powerhouse for these women to star in this movie and deliver, incredible performances. It was, very enjoyable. I don't know if actually, I'll just put it this way. I would recommend watching the Philadelphia Story over The Women, even though there are men in this movie. It stars Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, and James Stewart, and there's terrific performances by all three of them. Jimmy Stewart gets drunk in this movie, or his character does, for a decent stretch of the film, and I don't think I've seen outside of like It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart play like a drunkard at any point, and he is like very convincing, and it's super, super entertaining. Hepburn is great. Cary Grant is great. Like this is a movie about a socialite whose wedding plans are complicated by the simultaneous arrival of her ex-husband and a tabloid magazine journalist. That's the description from Wikipedia. But man, it's just a solid writing. There's tons of like back and forth zingers and stuff like that. This is like it came out in 1940, and it just feels like a really classic rom-com that like transcends the genre, the tropes that appeared later in the genre. That anything, if you're talking about romantic comedies and you sort of roll your eyes at the way that they incorporate certain elements or always play out very predictably, and you're talking about the movies that came out in the 80s and 90s, I would still recommend going back and watching this one because it came out way before then, and it is predictable in a way, but it's also super, super entertaining, and the script is just so solid. So that's the Philadelphia Story that came out in 1940.
It's very interesting about the women's all-female cast, because when you said that never occurred to me that I had probably never seen a movie that has an all-female cast, and I was trying to think about it, and I can think of a dozen all-male casts. But
that seems way more. Maybe there's something that I've seen where it only has, like one or two cast members. It's like a really small scale indie movie that is only about, a woman and her best friend or something like that I can't think of off the top of my head. But this has a huge sprawling cast, so it's really impressive in that way.
Yeah, the closest thing I can come up with is like The Descent, the 2005 horror movie that had like, I think it had one guy in it, but it was mostly women. I don't know. That's really crazy, and I'm surprised that there. Not that we should be arguing for all of one sex casts out there, but I don't know, something I just never thought of. Did you mean to skip over the Escape at Dannemora?
Yeah, I watched the first episode of Escape at Dannemora, which Peter's talked about a bunch, and I don't have much to say about it because I've only seen the first episode, but the music in that show already seems like really, I mean, like I think Dave Chen, who hosts the Slash Filmcast, was talking about how the music budget must have been completely out of control, and I'm just sort of, I'm interested to dive into it a little bit further, but I was very impressed with the songs that they were able to get and how expensive that must have been. And they also used a really deep cut song called From the Beginning from Emerson, Lake and Palmer that my dad listened to all the time and I listened to growing up. And I've never heard it used in any piece of media ever. So I was like completely taken aback that they used this super deep cut song. So yeah, anyway, that's Escape at Dannemora. That's on Showtime right now.
Yeah, one of the lead characters blasts like a pop station with pop songs in one of the work areas. So you get a lot of that kind of stuff, which is great. Chris, aside from the 2 Fyre documentaries, what have you been watching?
I watched a film. It's on VOD this weekend, and it's in a few theaters. It's called The Standoff at Sparrow Creek, and it is very good. It's a low-budget indie film, and it shows you exactly like how to do so much with so little. It's almost entirely set in one location. It follows this militia. They're a right-wing militia, and they find out there was a shooting at a cop's funeral, and one of their guns in their armory is missing. So they think one of them did the shooting, and obviously that's going to draw heat on them. So they're basically trying to figure out which one of them did the deed. It's sort of like Reservoir Dogs, where there's one person who's a traitor and all that stuff, but it's not really like that at all. And this was incredible. It's so tense and so well made, and I can't imagine the budget on this was high at all, but it looks phenomenal. Like it makes this one location just so cinematic with by using shadows and certain angles. And I was really impressed with it. Like, this is probably better than 85% of, big budget movies that will come out this year.
Where can people watch this?
It's available on VOD right now, so you can probably rent it on VOD or like on iTunes or whatever.
Very
I
cool.
just want to pipe in and say I saw this in Passing Fest last year, and we talked about it last year during another episode of this show. And I'll second Chris. This movie is fantastic, and while it may not be a one-to-one Reservoir Dogs comparison, in my write-up about the movie, I did compare it to the energy I felt watching the movie was comparable to when I first watched Reservoir Dogs. It's that kind of indie. And the director, whose name I'm pulling up right now, Henry Dunham, if this is his first feature, then holy shit, his second movie is going to be like, I can't wait. He's clearly someone to keep an eye on.
Very cool. Let's move on to HT. HT, you finally saw If Beale Street Could Talk.
I finally saw If Beale Street Could Talk long after I finalized my top 10 of 2018, which I hugely just regret because If Beale Street Could Talk would have totally made my top 10. This is such a lush lyrical film by Barry Jenkins, and I was just awash in all of the colors and the vibrancy of this film. I absolutely adored it. I haven't read the James Baldwin book upon which this is based, but I hear that the book focuses more on the crime aspects and the sort of the corrupt criminal institutions through which the main character, I forget his name. Yes, Fonny gets falsely imprisoned, and I'm really glad that Barry Jenkins decided to go a sort of different route. He decided to focus more on the characters and the romance, and I think that really is where If Beale Street Could Talk has its strength, because it's such a sublime piece in the way that it just focuses on the faces of all of the characters in here, and Jenkins again brings out the best in his cast. Everything is just so beautiful, and the expressions are just so rich that I loved watching every frame of this film.
Yeah, I wish you could have saw this before the top 10s.
I know.
But we like, a lot of sites will publish their top 10s, a lot of critics, in the first couple weeks of December. And we actually are in the later mix of it. We publish it in the first week or so of January. Is that correct, Jacob?
Yeah, we try to give ourselves a little bit more time so we can all try to catch up. So
we try to give ourselves enough time, but it's every year there ends up being stuff that, we just can't catch.
Yeah. When I saw Shoplifters, I was torn between seeing Shoplifters or If Beale Street Could Talk. And Shoplifters ended up going to the number one spot in my list, so I'm very happy I saw that. But I was upset that I wasn't able to see both before my list was finalized.
cool. What else have you been watching this week?
So this was inspired by Chris's most recent Now Stream This column. I watched The Commuter, which is like the most dad movie ever. I say that in that when I was watching this movie, I could just imagine all dads watching this and being like, yeah, this is a great movie. This is a Liam Neeson film in which he stars as a commuter who one day, as he's going on a train back from work after he's been fired, is approached by a woman played by Vera Farmiga, who tells him that he has a choice to find one person who doesn't belong on the train, and he can get, I think, $10,000 out of it. And this ends up being a very tense thriller in which he is being watched and trying to figure out who is calling these shots and pulling these strings, and lives are on the lines. And Liam Neeson, of course, is an ex-cop who somehow is trained in like SWAT style fight training. And it's just so fun. And Jean-Claude Serra directs this in a way that's like way more stylish than it should be. Like at the beginning, there's a montage of just like these mundane suburban moments, and there's just so many angles and intense close-ups, and I'm like, why does this feel so tense? And they're just going through a montage of their everyday lives, but it's fun. It's kind of like, it feels kind of like a B movie with an immense budget, and I really enjoyed it for that.
Yeah, I feel like this is the type of movie that's going to gain like some steam on TNT with the dads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, solid TNT movie. What else have you been watching?
So I've been catching up on 2 TV shows that I've really enjoyed but haven't been able to watch frequently until now. The first was, I'm going to talk about The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. This is the Netflix series starring Kiernan Shipka as the titular Sabrina Spellman in the sort of revamped horror gothic take on this iconic character. I had watched a few episodes before and I'd really enjoyed it, but just didn't have the time to finish it. So I caught up on season 1 just in time for season 2 to come, I think in April. But I remember watching this and I was really anticipating it because it was from the same producers as Riverdale. And I liked the sitcom when I was growing up. And I was kind of eager to see this sort of gothic take. I anticipated it to be something akin to like Riverdale meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the first few episodes kind of confirmed that thought. But then it got very dark and very violent towards the end. There's a lot of throat slitting, and throat slitting is like the one thing that I can't stand watching. I don't know why. It's a big fear of mine. When I was young, I used to fear that like arrows would come and like slice my throat open. I don't know why I have that fear, but I was not fond of that. But otherwise, it's really, I quite enjoyed the first season, and it's not quite as overwritten as Riverdale. It's definitely better written than Riverdale. It doesn't have the camp factor that Buffy has either. It's kind of its own genre. So I liked it though. It was I'm not sure if I would call it campy, but it definitely has a sort of a heightened tone to it, which I enjoyed. And then I also I've caught up on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is the CW series co-created and starring Rachel Bloom. So this is a series that I've been kind of waving the flag for because a lot of people don't give it a fair shot because of its title, and you know, I understand if people are put off by that. I was initially put off by it, but Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is this really clever, really brilliantly written musical series that both subverts the tropes of the romantic comedy while expertly executing all of its sort of archetypes in a way that is both sincere and also satirical. It walks that line really well. And this is its final and 4th season. fourth and final season of the series. It's wrapping up all of the storylines, and I really love how this series has become not just like a send-up of the romantic comedy, but a really nuanced depiction of mental illness, especially in the way that the fourth season has kind of seen Rachel Bloom's character, Rebecca, come to terms with her mental illness and deal with it in a really healthy and sensitive way. And I'm really enjoying that. Musical numbers are great, of course, as always. Just when I think that they are out of musical genres or types to parody, they keep surprising me. Like this past week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, they did a brilliant. I've never seen Cats, but they did a brilliant Cats parody, which also doubled as an episode about vaginal health. Because get it, like cats, pussy. Anyways. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is a great show. If you haven't given it a chance yet, I highly encourage you to. It's a funny, kind of has a lot of cringe humor, especially in the first, actually all throughout, but in the first seasons especially. But if you can like stomach some like secondhand embarrassment, I highly recommend it.
I think you've sold me on both of these TV shows. I did watch the first episode of Sabrina, and I was quite taken with it, but like, I don't know if it's just a thing with me and streaming shows, but it's so easy if it's like the next episode isn't like in the list of on your DVR. It's so easy to like get distracted by all those tiles on Netflix. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so easy if you're not binging it to, just it to fall off. So I'm going to try to check both of these out.
The first 3 seasons of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend are on Netflix as well.
Cool. Let's move on to what we've been eating. In the last couple months, I've been talking about my dieting, which is something I was hesitant to talk about on this podcast and in public because I feel like that can be annoying. But I've gotten a lot of great responses from Slash Film listeners and readers and my followers on Twitter. We've actually been getting messages from people who listen to this podcast that have decided to use myself and Jacob as inspiration to go on the keto diet and have, been sharing their successes and how much weight they've been losing. So it's really great to be hearing that, and that makes me very happy. This past week, I ordered new jeans that were 6 inches smaller than the jeans I had been wearing for the last couple of years, and they fit. So that is a success. And when I went and saw my new doctor at Forward, which I talked about in a previous episode, one of his goals for me was to get off my heartburn medication. I take 2 pills of Prilosec every day. That's twice the recommended dosage. But I had been prescribed that a few years ago from a doctor. And basically, if I don't take those pills, my life is miserable. My throat is eaten up by acid. And last week he told me that he thinks with as much weight loss as I've had, which at this point is nearing 40 pounds, he thought that I could go down to 1 pill a day. I was skeptical. I went down to 1 pill a day, and I am not having any heartburn, which is also kind of amazing because one of the things that causes heartburn is fatty foods, which I'm eating a lot of on this diet. So those are my 2 success stories of the week that I'm very happy about. And again, I'm not saying everybody you have to go on the keto diet to lose weight. There's many ways to lose weight. I am happy that people are listening and getting inspiration from this. And I'll continue to share some of the things I'm finding, which are low sugar. The one thing I wanted to kind of recommend this week is there's this company called Chalk Zero, which has these like squares that are almost like Ghirardelli chocolate squares. And the thing I discovered this week from them is peppermint bark, which I think it's sold out on their website, but you can get notified for when it comes back in. And I'm a big fan of peppermint bark. And one of the big disappointments of being on a diet this holiday season was not being able to eat peppermint bark. And this stuff tastes like real peppermint bark. It doesn't taste like, it doesn't taste close to peppermint bark. It's not like Halo ice cream to real ice cream. This tastes like real peppermint bark. So I'll leave the links to those in the show notes. Jacob, how has your diet been going?
My diet's going really well so far. Keto is one of the few diets where I don't feel miserable every single day. I mean, there are tough moments and tough stretches, but normally when I've dieted in the past, it's been like agony. Like the entire time, I feel like I'm miserable and upset and angry at the world. But I feel, very stable, calm, and comfortable on this diet. I mean, if this is like the new normal for me, which it may have to be, once I reach my goal weight, I'm not going to suddenly reverse. I'm going to have to, stick with this, for most of my life. I can do this, and I feel like I can stick to this change for the foreseeable future. I've been tracking my actual physical progress on my Instagram page, Jacob Samuel Hall. So if you want to see photographs, and if you want to see some before and after stuff, a little over 2 weeks into this, there's already been some decent, some minor but decent results. You can go check out those photos. But meantime, I'll also
say minor, but I'm seeing this photo of a shirt that clearly didn't fit you side by side with you wearing the same shirt, and it seems to fit quite nicely.
It's still a little snug. I think maybe next week I may be close to being able to wear it in public, but fingers crossed. But yeah, I'll second Peter's snack recommendations. Slim Fast makes a keto peanut butter cup that is very good. Like I said, it wouldn't be delicious if you're eating it like next to Reese's, like in real life. But on a diet, when you really want a peanut butter cup, it's really good. And also a Swerve cake mix. I'm not sure where you can find this regularly. We buy it at a store called Central Market here in Austin. I would definitely check online if you can't find it at a grocery store near you. But it's a cake mix where each cupcake you make with it is only 3 carbs, or 3 net carbs. And it tastes enough like a real cupcake for it to really scratch that itch. So it's Swerve cake mix and Slim Fast peanut butter cups. Slim Fast keto peanut butter cups are very good and are keeping me from like when I'm running a snack. I actually have a snack I can go have as opposed to having to shut down entirely, which is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think those Slim Fast keto peanut butter cups are actually under the name Fat Bomb, which is the term that people use in keto. They're not really actually fat bombs, and that might even prevent people who just want a low-sugar snack from trying them. But they're very good.
Yeah, Fat Bomb, from what I understand, my wife does all the research. I just do what she says when it comes to this kind of stuff. People who are very, very serious ketoers, like more extreme than Peter and I even, they try to eat a very large amount of fat, like much, much, much more fat, to do, I guess, as part of the process of the chemical, ketosis process. And I can't explain it to you, but so fat bombs are kind of snacks, they fully full of fat. But when you're on keto, the fat doesn't really matter as long as you're keeping the carbs and sugar down. Yeah,
but I think Slim Fast is just trying to steal that term, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brad, on the opposite side of things, what have you been eating this week?
Not anything super exciting, but I did get my hands on a couple things that when I was at the store earlier this week running some errands. I've got my hands on the new Oreo The Most stuff, which is regular Oreo cookies that have even more cream filling than the double stuff Oreos. They're very thick. There's like only 8 of them per row in the smaller Oreo packages.
Brad, I know I share your obsession with Oreos and different seasonal Oreos. This is honestly one of the only things right now that I want that could convince me to go off my diet. So tell me, is it as amazing as I picture it to be?
They are good. I will say that they are enjoyable, but I do feel like there's a little too much cream filling. Like I feel like there's a happy medium maybe between double stuff and this, where it would probably be like perfect. But I still like them. Like I mean, it's just like the mix of the cream with the classic Oreo cookie is always good. And so like dipping them in milk is good. I was talking actually to my girlfriend about this, and they'd probably be good if you like use them to make like your own homemade McFlurries, since there's a lot more frosting to work with and mixing it in with the ice cream and the cookie. But yeah, they're pretty tasty. They're not not mind blowing because they're not much different than a regular Oreo, but they're good.
Cool. What else have you been eating or consuming?
And so one of the things obviously that I go out of my way to find are different flavors of Mountain Dew, really any soft drink. But there's some new flavors for Mountain Dew Amp, which is basically Mountain Dew's like energy drink kind of brand. And they've taken some new flavors that seem slightly different from their Game Fuel variants of Mountain Dew, which they release whenever there's like a new big video game and they're doing a cross promotion for. And so they have 4 new flavors of Mountain Dew Amp that's under the Game Fuel moniker now. They have Cherry Burst, Berry Blast, the original Mountain Dew flavor, and Tropical Strike. And I'm not really a berry kind of flavor kind of person, especially when it comes to like a blue raspberry or stuff like that. So I didn't get that one, but I did get the Cherry Burst and the Tropical Strike, and both are pretty tasty. They taste pretty similar to the regular Mountain Dew Game Fuel flavor variants, but just with slight variation. I think it's just because of whatever other ingredients are in their energy drink style. The only downside, I guess, is like they come in bigger cans, so it's a lot of Mountain Dew to drink. You know, I'm really only down to drink like 1 can of Mountain Dew and just a regular size in a single sitting, and so it's a little too much. But they do taste pretty good, and so if you're a Mountain Dew fan,
but Brad, these are made for people who sit in front of their computers playing Warcraft for 20 hours in a row.
I mean, that's very true. So they'll probably enjoy them since they don't have to get up as many times. I will say, though, these have a really – I don't know if this is a normal Mountain Dew Amp thing, since I have never had a regular one before, but they have these weird can tops where it's like this black plastic tab that you flip up and pull back so that it slides it back over the mouthpiece rather than popping it open. I was really confused by it at first, and I don't really understand what the point is of it. But I guess sometimes gaming gets really intense, and you don't want to spill your drink when you get mad at a 15-year-old for beating you. I don't know.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been playing. Jacob, you're the only one that's been playing things this week. So what have you been playing?
Even though I'm not really playing things as much as I'm preparing to play. Once again, on my Instagram page, I'm tracking my progress as I learn how to paint miniatures. I finished the first batch of Warhammer 40k figures. I've been painting some Metal Reaper figures, which are these sort of $5 to $7 like fantasy figures that like you use for D&D games. And I'm really enjoying it. I mean, like getting into the hobby of painting and building models and miniatures is, you know, there's definitely a amount of money I spent up front to buy all the supplies, buy all the basic paints, but I'm really enjoying it, and so far I'm pleased with how things look. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to be the kind of guy who can be like a master miniature painter, but you know, my stuff looks very presentable on a table, so I'm very happy with it.
Jacob, I was looking at these photos, and I was in disbelief that this is your first time painting because these look very, very good.
Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. It's very fun, and I think it's a case where like I thought I'd maybe learn and just be really crappy at first, but you know, I just took my time, made a lot of mistakes, fixed those mistakes, and I feel like this is a hobby that a lot of people maybe think is harder than it is. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but it requires a lot of concentration and like, you know, effort to make it look good. But I'm pleasantly surprised by how accessible it is once you're in there.
Yeah. Okay, that does it for today's Slash Film Daily. In the doc, you can find links to Josh's article running down the differences between Fyre and Fyre Fraud. Which one's better? Which one should you watch? Which one's less ethically compromised? There's also a link to HT's article on the Battle Angel Passport to Iron City immersive experience. And you can find more of all of our work on slashfilm.com. Linked in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And if you want life advice from Chris, you can also send it there as well. Please go to our iTunes page, write us a couple sentences, you know, hit that 5 stars, tell your friends, spread the word, and we will see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter.
Yes, Jacob?
I've opened up the gargantuan book of insult, offense, and effrontery by Louis A. Safian to a random page, and it is the liars section.
Who is the liar today?
Oh, I think you're all liars, because the way a section is set up is that it has the lie written out. Then in parentheses, it tells you who the person is making the lie. So I'm able to cross-reference it with all of you to tell the truth about all of you. Like, for example, Ben Ben says, I have a real big job, but he actually watches elephants at the zoo.
I feel like that's a great thing, though. I'd like to watch elephants at the zoo.
It's definitely a big job. Well, HT, your brother occupied the chair of applied electricity in a famous public institution because he went to the electric chair and sing.
Oh my god!
Wow.
Well, Chris, he got his fingers burned on Wall Street because he was picking up a lit cigar from the sidewalk.
Oh, what a rascal!
Oh, Brad, I heard you hit the top in television because you fixed aerials.
I do love helping people with their TV signals.
And that
wait, I'm confused. Explain that one to me.
He hit the top in television because he's up high fixing TV aerials.
Oh, okay.
He hit the top.
Yeah, I get it.
And well, Peter, I hear you dine with the brass because no one would trust you with the silver.
Oh boy.
Man, Jacob, your delivery is just chef's kiss on these.
I'm just speaking the great truths about all of us here.
I want Jacob to do a full old-timey podcast where he just, flings these insults.
See,
well, as a child, I was a musical prodigy. I played on the linoleum.
Oh, boy.
I think this book publisher should hire Jacob to read the audiobook version of this book.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I wonder if anyone has bought this book because of Jacob reading it on here.
I sure hope so. Because no woman ever walks back when she goes for a ride with me, because I drive a hearse.
Wait, did you kill somebody?